And my presentation is structured in this way. I basically will talk, all I'm going to talk about is mainly coming from this think tank, which we call Dimension Cadastre in French. It's a think tank in Switzerland that we have set up in Switzerland. And we produced the first report last year in 2014, which is in English. We have it in 4 languages: German, French, Italian, and English. And we chose a title which is a sort of has a double meaning. We're all surveyors, and we would like to motivate our colleagues to also step beyond the limits. We're dealing with limits, of course, that's our profession, but maybe in our thinking we also should try to step beyond them. And in Switzerland, the reason why we established this think tank is that we're slowly getting towards the end of the digital format of the cadastre, not of the cadastre, of course, but we have soon we have a full coverage of the whole country. Other countries have been quicker than we are, but nonetheless. And we're asking ourselves, where is it going to head in the future? We think the issues are maybe not technical, but the issues in Switzerland mainly are very much organizational. We have a federalist environment with 26 cantons, so that creates different sorts of questions, as you probably would have in the Netherlands, where you have a one centralized cadastral system. What we identified in this report is were some, first of all, the changing world that is around us. And I mean, I don't want to waste too much time. I think it's quite obvious what is going on around us. But then out of this, then we came up with a few trends that we identified that may affect us. We're not sure how, but maybe they would affect us. And I just go through around the circle a bit. We think that the objects of the cadastre may adapt or may evolve a bit. Because we also see things going on that, we're just thinking of this example in Switzerland. We had this bank secrecy. I'm not a fan of it either, but the Swiss politicians, they were very strong about this. This is never ever going to happen. And 3-4 months later, under the pressure of the US, it was gone. So that was that showed us, I mean, it's legal in Switzerland, but then some legitimate claims changed the whole thing around. And I mean, we also have other developments going on, this Uber taxi system that may not always be legal, what they're doing, but it's quite legitimate. I mean, we think that that's a good thing and that could provide some better service. Maybe there are more examples in there. Something else we think that maybe in the future our parcels or our buildings, they will be equipped with lots of sensors, and the sensors are linked to the internet. So there will be a lot of data. Don't ask me what sort of data is coming along there, but temperature, humidity, whatever, but maybe something else that may affect us as well. So what we're talking of, we have a lot of data. There could be potentially be data mining, and what we're going to do with it, or what may happen with this, we don't know. In order to make all this happening, then all these data, all these sensors, all these whatever may have to be linked with each other. That's a big development that is going on as well. We have then something else that we have to look at. I mean, our devices, probably all of us walk around with a smart device in our pockets. And these pockets, first of all, it's kind of a window to the databases, to whatever is there we can access. We can watch it, we can have maps. But on the other hand, we also can send back in data, which then would lead to this crowdsourcing. All of us, we potentially could provide in some data as well. If we use it for the cadastre or not, I don't know. I mean, that's something else we have to think about. I mean, the cadastres, we have authentic data in there, authoritative data, with a stamp on it that they're valid, that they have a legal meaning. But crowdsourcing, maybe can help us there as well. So when we think all these data, crowdsourced data, big data, maybe we should also think about not only to regulate data, but maybe we also should regulate the algorithms, how we access those data or how these data are being sent in. So maybe it's not just the data and information that we have to put a stamp on, maybe we have to put a stamp on the algorithm. Because with all these open data platforms, there's lots of data being used, but it's very hard to see where the data are coming from. And I think that's quite crucial as well to think about these issues here. Then in the think tank, then we came up with three, let's call them developments that we think may affect us a bit more direct. So the first one is something that we think this whole positioning possibilities that we have nowadays, that could mean the end of the classic land surveying. I mean, of course, we still need some surveying being done, but maybe we won't need the surveyors that go out in the field and do the measurements in the field. Maybe there are other methods nowadays that can do the job. And maybe we rather should think of what the job actually is, because our job is not millimeter or centimeter. I think our job is providing ownership security, providing other things that would feed into questions that we just heard before. So this conclusion, that's kind of a Swiss conclusion, because we, as I mentioned before, we think we have problems in institutional, organizational ways. But nonetheless, I think we need a strategic vision that probably applies not only for Switzerland, but for all our countries. And who does what? Because in Switzerland, we have 90% of the work is done in the private sector. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but maybe we have to think about, is private sector doing even more or less, or what's the role of the public sector? Do we have to adapt the legal basis with all this crowdsourced data? Maybe there's some changes coming that we have to think about. And then in Switzerland we have these two levels between federal level, cantonal level, and that's something we will have to discuss in the very near future. Because it's working, but not always to the best as it could be, I think. A second development that we see is that land is probably more than just a property which is privately or publicly owned. It's the land or the parcel could be also a source of knowledge. It's the history of its use. I think it just has been mentioned before as well. It probably for certain decisions to take or planning, probably we would need to know about the past, about the history of a particular piece of land as well. And this information maybe we can get from authoritative data or maybe crowdsourced data. And all this information, if we can link it up to a bigger whole, maybe we can gain more and new knowledge. So we think that the land is more than just the object that has to be surveyed, and the whole history of a parcel probably can tell a story, and maybe the cadastre has to rethink its role in this as well. Just by the way, I'm just asking questions. I don't have answers, so but maybe we can come up in the workshops in the afternoon with some answers. A third development that we see is that maybe, or probably the parcel will have a unique, and maybe not only a unique, but maybe a universal identifier. Because when you have that, then probably we can attach some sort of intelligence to each parcel. And we think that maybe this thing that we called URI, I think Universal Resource Identifier, that sort of internet terminology, that we assign such an identifier to each parcel, and then we also can add all the information to that parcel. We can add a chip to each parcel, which then talks to the internet, And on this chip, then we can also link information such as weather, the seismic hazard, geological information, noise pollution, and on and on. So there's many possibilities. So maybe, or we think that maybe the parcel may not just be an isolated piece of information, who the owner is, and what its use is, but maybe it becomes much more a cell in a living landscape, maybe. What that could mean is illustrated in this slide, which I just took it from a New Zealand report. They also are looking into the future. And maybe, I mean, technology, everything is there. And if we look at our piece of land and we have our smart device there, maybe with all the technology we also can make invisible objects visible. And in that sense, maybe the landscape becomes the map. It's not the map itself, but it's maybe the landscape itself can be made into a map. And I think technology is there, but the whole, organizational structures that we are having behind, I think that's the big issue, and I think that's something that we're still struggling with a bit. So that much about these trends and developments that we came across in this think tank. Since then, we also had a look at other things. We also had a quick look at the social and economic context that we're in at the moment. And just recently in Davos in Switzerland, we had this World Economic Forum. And I think the motto was a bit the fourth industrial revolution. So I just grabbed this from their website. And the first revolution was where steam and water power that helped to mechanize the production. We had a second revolution where electricity then helped to accelerate production, to have mass production. A third revolution was the electronics and IT, which helped to automate the production. And they're thinking the fourth revolution is now sort of a cyber physical system. I mean, what I would translate it in, it's a digital revolution, and it's a combination of technologies. I mean, with all the digital devices or possibilities that we have, we can combine things much more. Something else which I just came across the last 2 months. It's a book from Jeremy Rifkin. He's sort of a visionary, I think an American visionary who's consulting with the EU, with other countries. And he's talking of the third industrial revolution. I think the numbering of this industrial revolution is a bit confusing there. But I think shouldn't confuse us, because what he's stating is quite interesting and relevant as well. He is arguing that at the moment there are drastic changes going on in the whole communication technology. I mean, it started with internet, email, and all these kind of things. And we can connect devices, issues, machines. That's one thing. And something else that is happening, our whole energy production is probably also changing quite a bit. I mean, we used to have huge power plants which produce our energy, but with all these solar-powered houses and everything that is happening, or windmills, so suddenly things are not that centralized anymore. So there's a very big decentralization going on. He even talks of the Internet of Energy. And combined with this whole communication technology, the new possibilities, he thinks that it's a whole development that we're not really, I mean, we didn't really understand yet where this is going to take us, but this is something big happening. And I tried to grab some of his examples that he's listing here. And if you can summarize all these examples on the web, it's all about sharing platforms. I mean, we cannot only share cars and bikes, but we can share our apartments. We can this Uber taxi service. There's handicraft companies. They can put up their production on the web, being closer to the customer. I mean, TripAdvisor, how we're planning our holidays, our trips to other cities. I mean, Facebook, Twitter, and on and on. And I mean, when we look at the music industry in particular, I mean, they were basically rolled over with this whole digital revolution. And they tried, or probably in the beginning, they didn't really understand what was going on. And I mean, we have seen the results. The music industry is dramatically changed now. And also in the finance sector, there's something going on. We still don't know yet, but I mean, all these mobile payment platforms are coming up. So we don't really know, but I would summarize it. It's that all this supply is the same as here with the energy production. It's not a few central supply points anymore for many issues. It's much decentralized, and that also means that there's a closer contact between suppliers and consumers. But it's not very well defined anymore because it's not a central supply point. There's many suppliers and many consumers. And how we deal with each other, we can do this through internet, through this network. And what it does to our social, cultural behavior, I think we're in a whole area of change. And where it's going to take us, as mentioned, I don't have answers. But I think there's something going on. Now, coming to these dimensions in the cadastre, coming back to the cadastre a bit again. In this think tank, as I mentioned in Switzerland, we're talking of 5 dimensions now. I mean, that's a suggestion, but I think the first 3 dimensions, that's quite clear. That's probably internationally accepted, what we mean by this. Even though the third dimension, that's something that is only just starting. I mean, we talk about it for a while, okay. Sorry, 5 minutes, 3 dimensions. The third dimension, it's something that is coming. And what I see there, it's much more, probably not up above the ground, but in Switzerland, I think it's much more under the ground, where the third dimension is interesting. In the Swiss legislation, we have something that land ownership goes up and down as far as there's a reasonable interest. But as you can imagine, we call it a rubber article. What it really means, I mean, a court or a lawyer, what do they do with it? And at the moment, it's still kind of a first come, first serve situation in the underground. So when you have a geothermal thrill in place and then the railways want to build their tunnel, I mean, who is solving that problem? That's not clearly defined. We have other projects, but considering the time, I just keep running. I just jump to the 4th dimension. That is something that we didn't really tackle yet, but there's some potential in it as well. I mean, we have all our data, and we have them in place. And or especially the land use planners, maybe if they have a city over time, and when they see the development, I mean, that can tell them something quite interesting. Where could that lead us? And in Switzerland, we have a nice example on our web portal, where all the geodata is of Switzerland, or most of it anyway. We also scanned all the topographic maps since the 1840s, I think. But when I looked at Bern, then I grabbed these pictures. Then you see how the city is growing. So that for the land use planners, that potential is also quite interesting to see where, in what direction a city is growing. But that is only one thing. I mean, with this historic data, we can make projections, simulations, but we think that in the 5th dimension, there would be something more. The 5th dimension, we call it the dimension of anticipation. And there, it builds on top of the 4th dimension. But what we do here, we also add, or we use tools from big data and data mining. We add more, we have more sensors which may predict what may happen in the future. And just to illustrate a bit, I have a list of examples what that could mean. So we had an example, I think in China, I mean, there was an earthquake happening and the news spread quicker through Twitter than through the official channels. I mean, the official channels are quite quick as well nowadays. Within 10-15 minutes, probably you know where an earthquake happened, how strong it was. But obviously Twitter is even quicker than that. Or if you look at the social media, then maybe you can detect a new music bestseller. So if you have software in place which sort of follows and tracks social media activities, that can tell something. The same thing, it seems, there was BlackBerry employees became more active on LinkedIn, maybe to look for new job possibilities. And if you as a stock exchange or stockholder, if you come across this, that may tell you something about economic well-being of that company. And as mentioned, our mobile phones are permanent sensors, and I think they're used already to monitor and improve traffic flow. And we also can think that when there's an increased number of requests on real property platforms in a certain location, a certain suburb, maybe that tells something, and maybe land use planners can use this information as well. And there's something which is quite interesting, which we just came across rather recently. I used a French name because I couldn't come up with an English name, and not even in German. I would not know how to translate. But just try to think of it as there's this subcontracting. And surtraitance means sort of above contracting. And what it means is, maybe I tried to explain here. I mean, we all know what app stores are. Either we use iPhones or Samsung, Android mobile devices. It's a whole kind of an ecosystem which we are kind of linked into. But it's a sales platform where a lot of software developers can produce their apps to sell something, to monitor something, to guide something, whatever. So that's a whole ecosystem. And the value in this, the whole value chain, is then up with Apple, with Google, or with Microsoft. Also the map services, that's the same kind of mechanism. And that's why all these big companies, they try to have something in place which then ties us into it. And then, I mean, providers and consumers are tied into it as well. And I think that's something we should be thinking about. Maybe there's a whole new way of setting up value chains. Okay, that much about that. Maybe we can talk about in the afternoon. Just quick, I just come to the conclusion. I think that our societies are entering a new era of a digital economy. I mean, we're already in, but what it really means, we don't really have a big grasp of it. Also, the social and political context is developing rapidly. And coming back to the cadastral systems, I mean, I'm coming from a cadastral agency. We should remember ourselves, cadastral systems are systems of documentation. We document facts, rights and restrictions about land. And I mean, our data is used for something, authentic, authoritative. I mean, we have to provide security of ownership. That's something we should never forget. But our data are at the same time also used for geoinformation systems. And I think who owns what, that's quite crucial in monitoring, in developing land use planning. So these whole geodata infrastructures are a big part of our duty as well. So how do we fit in? And the question may even be, how and should we position ourselves in there? And I mean, the answer or the question is rhetoric. I mean, we have to fit in there somehow, but we didn't really understand how. So the aspect of those 5 dimensions, that may be something that we have to think about. And what I also think we have to rethink the structures of our value chains. Thank you very much.
Thank you.